I hope you're ready for where the Brickyard was right, and I hope you're ready for a history lesson today, because as you say, you're a history buff, and we tend to be history buffs on the show. And the Carolina Panthers, we just got the news on Monday that they fired Frank Reich. He's now the second shortest tenure at head coach. And you ask, what head coach has lasted longer than Frank Reich? Oh, I know. Urban Meyer. You know, the guy who's going to Ohio clubs after the Jacksonville Jaguars game, going to his old stomping ground
and finger gunning a middle-aged mom.
Yeah, finger gunning a middle-aged mom. Even the Jacksonville Jaguars held on to him longer than Frank Reich. And it's just a testament to how boring and uninspiring Frank Reich was. And I saw this coming. Frank Reich was my least favorite hiring of any head coach. I'm like, you want to develop a young quarterback and you hire Frank Reich, failed quarterback, Josh McCown, failed quarterback, also Frank Reich, failed head coach. He comes from Philadelphia, goes to Indianapolis. They're like, all right, he's going to implement some of what Doug Peterson is doing. He's going to go out there, fix Carson Wentz, because he was definitely the one that coached Carson Wentz to a potential MVP season if he doesn't get hurt that year, not Doug Peterson, right? Well, clearly everything that was happening in Philadelphia was Doug Peterson, because what Doug Peterson did was fix Urban Meyer, the guy that lasted longer than Frank Reich. Doug Peterson goes to Jacksonville, fixes that mess, wins a playoff game. What Frank Reich does, goes to Jacksonville against that Urban Meyer team, and then has one of the most horrendous coaching performances I've ever seen. Everyone's like, Carson Wentz sucks. Let's blame it all on Carson Wentz, even though statistically Carson Wentz had a pretty good season, and most teams would be happy staying with that guy.
27 touchdowns, 7 picks.
And then you bring in Phillip Rivers on that team. You have one of the best rosters on that team consistently. And then Frank Reich consistently underachieves on that team, brings in Matt Eberflus as his defensive coordinator. You wonder why the Colts defense was consistently underachieving. Well, it was a combination of Frank Reich being boring, uninspiring, and Matt Eberflus, who clearly just won his first game in his division as a head coach with the Chicago Bears. And
3 years in.
3 years in. So Frank Reich, I always thought he was an underachiever. I always thought he was very uninspiring. I could not get through an entire Hard Knocks episode with him because he was just putting me to sleep, along with Carson Wentz and his family just not being interested in that. But you thought it was a good idea to develop your young quarterback. When Frank Reich, what was he supposed to do? Oh yeah, fix Carson Wentz. Couldn't do that. Develop a quarterback in Indianapolis. Develop a winning culture in Indianapolis. And he couldn't do that. And then you bring him into Carolina, and then you fire him. You fire him at week 12. He couldn't even last longer than Urban Meyer. So this is a complete disaster for the Carolina Panthers. And then for Frank Reich, this is a guy this is just like a used car scammer, because what he did to the Carolina Panthers was an absolute scam. And you know why? I'm going to pull up the numbers of his contract, because not only are you still paying Matt Rule until 2026, you're paying Frank Reich, who signed a 4-year contract through 2026. David Tepper will be on the hook for an estimated $9 million per season for the next 3 years. He's paying him $25,000 a day to not be the head coach. The Raiders wouldn't do this last year with Josh McDaniels because they were too cheap. Well, the Carolina Panthers, credit to them for not being too cheap, but you got scammed by Frank Reich. I'm a former quarterback. I'll help out Bryce Young here. And then as soon as he was like, sometimes, owner is involved, and then sometimes they take a step back and they let you run your team and build the roster how you want to. I'm like, this guy of all people is calling out someone in the front office who is going to clearly axe you at the end of the year and get you fired. You don't want to be in the bad graces of the front office. You want to be a likable personality. Yeah, I'm on board with whatever you're doing. I'm happy to be here because I was already a bad head coach in Indianapolis. You're the one taking shots at the owner and the GM saying you wanted CJ Stroud. As soon as I said that, I was like, oh, this guy wants out and this guy doesn't want to be there and he's getting fired this year. So was I surprised he was fired midseason? A little bit. Was I surprised he was fired by the end of the year? No, because I saw this coming. I always thought this was a bad hire.
It was a bad hire. And now the context with Frank Reich is the last 22 games of Frank Reich, he is 4-17-1, which shows that he is in the same class as someone like a Hugh Jackson, who is just anemic as a head coach. And you talk about Bill Belichick, right? And how maybe he should keep his job because he's a defensive coordinator. and his style is on defense, and he still has a great defense. Well, Frank Reich is an offensive-minded guy, and they have the worst offense in the NFL. That's worse than the Tommy DeVito-led Giants, worse than the Mac Jones-led Patriots. You have the worst offense, and this is a team that had Bryce Young, who everyone said was the most NFL-ready quarterback in this draft. And I'm not here to bang the drum on Bryce Young. I think getting him out of a situation that has a failing head coach, a failing quarterbacks coach in Josh McCown, and then even Deuce Staley should not have been in there as a running backs coach either. I feel bad for Chuba Hubbard. Sorry, Chuba Hubbard. Sorry, Miles Sanders. But he has the second shortest NFL head coaching tenure of all time. And you think, well, who was worse than him? 1978, 49ers head coach. I don't even care about his name. It doesn't matter. But
get your history books out.
He traded 5 first-round picks before the season. And they traded a first-round pick for Orenthal James Simpson. And you're thinking, well, O.J. Simpson, one of the greatest running backs of all time. No. Yes, but no. His last season was with the 49ers. Spent a majority of his career with the Buffalo Bills, right? This is the equivalent of this, and this is the head coach that is almost as bad as Frank Reich. Traded O.J. Simpson, what would be equivalent to trading Tennessee Titans version Adrian Peterson. Washed at that point. No offense to Orenthal. He was 3 years removed from being requested the role of Terminator. So he ended up panning out pretty well until 1994. But that's where he's compared to. And don't forget that team ended up having the most turnovers in NFL history in a 14-game stretch. 63 turnovers in 14 games. You probably think.
Was that before or after the murder trial?
The Niners thing?
Yeah.
Oh, way before.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Orenthal didn't do it for about, or acquitted. He wasn't accused of, I should say, for the next 16 years. So maybe that's what led him to murder, is having to coach with that guy. Anyways, but yeah, Frank Reich, failure as head coach, and it seemed to be what they deemed to be the most safe hire, but it didn't. I mean, look at how these other coaches are going, right? Shane Steichen for the Colts panned out. They're in the playoffs right now. The Texans with DeMeco Ryans, their defense playing very well, and they're in the playoff mix at the same time. Frank Reich's hire has been an absolute disaster. We've banged on the drum about how bad this trade was to get Bryce Young, not even because of Bryce Young himself, because give him a chance with somebody else, anybody else. But you bang the drum, you could potentially have ruined the career of Bryce Young at this point with the trajectory that he is on, especially being picked right before CJ Stroud, making everybody CJ proud in this situation. What an absolute train wreck. Best believe when the top 5 worst teams list comes, I will not be kind to those Carolina Panthers, especially because since 2015, that's right, the 2015 season, 15-1 Patriot, makes it to the Super Bowl, loses to the Broncos. They have the 4th worst record in the NFL, and they are in the same class as the lowly New York Giants, the lowly New York Jets, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, who of course rebounded since then. And you go back to Mr. TJ Watt and what he did to that poor Carolina's team, literally ruining the entire franchise of the Carolina Panthers.